Now, as to the Protestant Reformation, which is the other topic of this class, there are a couple of things I want to focus on and I want you to pay attention to as you read the material. Yes, so you're reading a chapter from the book and you're reading Luther's 95 Theses, and you're also reading a chapter from Pell's, it's called The Other Reformation. And what we're going to get from this material is basically we're going to look at the Reformation through three main reformers. Yes, there are Martin Luther, John Calvin, and Henry VIII. Each of these reformers implemented or sort of pushed for different types of reformations, and they had different reasons for wanting to reform. So the first one, the one that began this movement was Luther, and actually what we need to look at that's important is the invention of the printing press. Yes, and actually in one of the activities, one group will, you will need to research the importance of the printing press. But basically what happened is that before Luther, there were other people that questioned the role of the church and the authority of the church or some of the teachings of the church. But these reformers were just confined to their small communities, usually persecuted, in many cases killed, and they would not have the possibility of spreading their ideas to a larger audience. Now, when Luther came around, and he started questioning the practices of the church, particularly the selling of indulgences, which were documents that the church sold to gain money to build a new basilica, the St. Peter's Cathedral. Luther questioned the role of the Pope and the position of the church and the existence of these documents, the indulgences. And by the time Luther was doing this, the printing press had already been invented, and so there was the possibility of making copies of his, the first document he wrote, there were the 95 Theses, but then all the other books that he wrote after that. And so he could distribute his ideas widely throughout the continent, even if after the Pope ordered all his work to be burnt. Of course, his supporters found ways to smuggle that into different places, and so Luther's ideas survived and could be spread largely thanks to the printing press. The question of, Luther was a Dominican monk, and in the video on this side, you will find a collection of clips from a film based on his life. And on the video on the other side we have Elizabeth, so I will talk about that later. So in the video of Luther, you will see how he changes from being a Dominican monk into this main reformer, and his reformation eventually is going to cause peasants' revolts and massacres. Eventually the peasants are going to revolt, and then of course they're going to be seriously suppressed, and they're going to be punished and killed. But it's important that you notice the reasons. Luther's motives were mostly religious, and the reasons why his Reformation succeeded are to a large extent political. Yes, the German princes supported him because they found the possibility of being in charge of their own destiny and not sending money back to the Pope in Rome very appealing, and they wanted to be able to make their own decisions. So politically they supported Luther, but religiously it's not clear whether they agreed with him or not, or whether they cared about that doctrine. But politically, the message of being in charge of their own affairs was very appealing. John Calvin came after Luther, and he implemented a different type of Reformation. He was French, but he implemented his Reformation in Switzerland. And he believed in a concept that's interesting. It's the concept of predestination. For him, before people are born, God had already decided whether or not they're going to be saved. And so it didn't matter much what you did in life, because that decision had already been made, and for him most people were sinners. And it had a wide implication for the conduct of most believers in Calvinists, because for a Calvinist, if you are successful, this is something that you should show because it's a proof that God's on your side. And so this is wide implications in the conduct of the Calvinists, as opposed to, let's say, Catholics, who usually live success with a sense of shame and a sense of that you should hide your success because it's something that should cause guilt. The last Reformation that we're going to look at is the Anglican Reformation in England, and this had a lot of different reasons. Yes, mostly this was implemented by a king, not a man of religion. And the story or the myth is that he brought the Reformation to England because he wanted to divorce his first wife to marry his second wife, who was younger and prettier, and because he wanted a male heir, and his first wife couldn't give him a male heir. And that's part of the story. But actually, Henry had other problems. Yes, he had problems with money. He had problems with power. First, let's look at the problem with money. His father had been engaged in a number of wars with France, and by the time Henry VIII got to power, the crown was bankrupt. And so he was in desperate need for money. And by bringing the Reformation to England, what he did is he passed a law that was called the dissolution of the monasteries, in which he acquired all the land that had belonged previously to the Catholic Church. And so by acquiring all that land, he could then either sell it or give it to nobles that he wanted loyalty from. And in that sense, he could recover part of the money that he needed, and also power. Power was the other problem he had. Yes, apparently he was a man who did not like to have anybody deciding above him. And so together with the Reformation, he passed this law that was the law of, he cancelled the possibility of appealing to the Pope. And he himself became the highest possible authority. And so, being the highest possible authority, both political and religious, he eventually could grant himself the divorce he wanted, and he divorced his first wife and married Anne Boleyn. But as I said, yes, divorce was one reason among a number of others that probably were more important. So we can see here that the three reformers actually implemented different types of reformations, and they had different motives for that, and they had different results. But as a general rule, what we can say is that the Reformation brought to Europe a lot of political conflict, wars, killings, massive migrations of people who either wanted to escape a reformed area or wanted to move into a reformed area. So we're going to see that this is going to be a massive event that will take different shapes and will affect the lives of a lot of people.